Now, a huge crisis is looming over the issue of equal voting rights in the world's second largest democracy. 1 year before the U.S. presidential elections, the U.S. Court of Appeals has given a ruling that could severely impact voters of color across the country. And in the eye of the storm is Section 2 of America's Voting Rights Act. On Monday, the U.S. Court of Appeals upheld a lower court's ruling that stated that private citizens and civil rights groups like the NAACP cannot file lawsuits under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The court says that this key provision can only be enforced for a case if the U.S. Attorney General decides to do so. In all likelihood, the decision will be appealed in the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's now talk about what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act says and why, for years now, it has been a point of contention from a legal and political perspective. Section 2 of VAR essentially prohibits any such discriminatory act or process in voting on the basis of race or even color. The law, which has been amended 5 times since it was adopted in 1965, provides wide-ranging protections to ensure that eligible voters are not denied the right to vote on account of race. The U.S. adopted the Voting Rights Act 58 years ago at the peak of the civil rights movement in the country. In a landmark move that marked equal voting rights, the act addressed barriers and even blockades that had historically prevented African Americans from casting their ballot. Now, coming back to the current ruling that marks a major step back to equitable voting rights, Section 2 has been increasingly relevant in multiple lawsuits that have challenged U.S. states with a history of racial discrimination. As of June this year, there are 32 active cases across 10 states that rest on the premise of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Let's quickly take a look at which states are impacted by the federal court's judgment. So far, only 7 states fall under the jurisdiction of the decision passed by the U.S. Court of Appeals. These states are Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Now, does this move have direct political impact? It absolutely does. Take a look at this map again. In the 2020 presidential race, of these 7 states, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump won the elections in 7 states. The Biden-led Democrats' campaign won only in the state of Minnesota. A 2022 survey of registered black voters in the U.S. makes matters more interesting. The survey reveals that 70% of black registered voters said they would vote for or were leaning towards the Democrats. Another 24% were either unsure or said they would back another candidate. And only a mere 6% of black registered voters said they would back the Republican candidate in the race. Observers say that a verdict like this further dilutes voices and votes of the people of color across the states. And it might help the Republicans further to cement their support in these 7 states.